Wild Fermentation, the flavor, nutrition, and craft of live culture foods, updated and revised version by Sandor Elix Katz. Chapter 5, Vegetable Ferments. Fermenting vegetables is the ideal way to begin fermenting. It requires no special equipment. You can use a jar that you probably already have. There's no need for starter cultures either. All the bacteria you need are already on the vegetables. Though some people recommend using whey, bacterial powders, or other starters in sauerkraut, this is unnecessary since lactic acid bacteria are present on all plants and consistently dominate in the submerged environment. I'll say it again, fermented vegetables are so safe with no case history of problems that the process of fermenting actually makes vegetables safer to eat than when consumed raw. Fermented vegetables are probiotic, improve digestion, and have been credited with wildly varied benefits from preventing cancer to reducing social anxiety. Fermented vegetables complement any meal. Their tangy flavors accent the rest of the food, stimulate digestion, and cleanse the palate. In many cuisines, they are routine elements. Koreans, for example, are so devoted to kimchi that most people eat it with every meal. I like to eat some fermented vegetables every day. It only takes 15 minutes of chopping or shredding to fill a jar that can ferment and feed you for weeks. Then, nutritious and delicate fermented vegetables are available whenever you want them, with no additional work required. Keep a few jars of different styles going for a variety. It's really easy. The biggest difference between vegetables left to rot and those destined for delicious fermentation is whether they are submerged under liquid or exposed to air. Molds will eventually develop on vegetables with exposure to air, and liquid protects them from air and molds. Usually the submerged fermentation environment is salty, but not always, and the proportion of salt can vary considerably. Long-term or warm climate fermentation needs more salt than shorter-term or cooler climate fermentation. Sauerkraut. For me, it all started with sauerkraut. I always loved it as a kid in New York City, almost as much as I loved sour pickles. When my first year of gardening in Tennessee produced an abundance of cabbage, I made my first batch of sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is generally thought to have originated in China and spread westward via Central Asian nomads. It is prepared in any number of regional styles. In Croatia and elsewhere in southeastern Europe, cabbage is generally soured whole in great barrels. A Russian variation uses apples or cranberries to sweeten the kraut. Germans are so strongly associated with sauerkraut that they are known in derogatory slang as krauts. And when the United States was at war with Germany, sauerkraut was temporarily dubbed Liberty cabbage. The fermentation of cabbage into sauerkraut is not the work of a single microorganism. Sauerkraut, like most fermentations, involves a succession of several different organisms. Not unlike the life of a forest in which a series of different trees follow each other as the dominant species, each succeeding type altering conditions to favor the next. The fermentation involves a broad community of bacteria with a succession of different dominant players, determined by the increasing acidity. Do not be deterred by the biological complexity of the transformation. That happens on its own once you create the simple conditions for it. Sauerkraut is very easy to make. The sauerkraut method is also referred to as dry salting because typically no water is added and the juice under which the vegetables are submerged comes from the vegetables themselves. This is the simplest and most straightforward method and results in the most concentrated vegetable flavor. And then next is a recipe for how to make sauerkraut, which we're going to skip and move on to crock method. Crock method, information for larger vessels. The jar method is ideal for first learning and small batches. But if you have a garden and are using fermentation as a strategy for preservation for even a few cabbages at once, you'll want a larger vessel. Gallon-sized 4-liter jars can be great, or ceramic crocks of various shapes and sizes, or wooden barrels or plastic buckets or barrels. See Equipment and Ingredients Basics on page 43 for a discussion of vessels. Stay away from metallic containers, even stainless steel, because acids corrode them, which of course will negatively affect the ferments. With a larger vessel at any scale, the process is exactly the same in terms of ingredients, proportions, preparation, and time. The only differences are in the vessel itself. In a crock or other larger vessel, it's more important to use a weight to keep the vegetables submerged. I typically use a cylindrical crock without an outer lid. I find a plate that fits inside the crock and let it sit on the vegetables. It's okay if there's a little space between the edge of the plate and the side of the crock. This plate that sits upon the fermenting vegetables is called a follower. You can find ceramic or wooden followers with crocks sometimes. If you custom cut a hardwood follower, make sure you leave a margin for the wood to expand and for the possibility that the crock edges taper inward. For a weight, I usually use a 1-gallon or 4-liter glass bottle filled with water. Scrubbed and boiled round river rocks work well too. Finally, I cover the whole thing with a cloth, generally a piece of old sheet or towel, to keep flies away. If the flies land on the aging kraut, maggots will likely develop. And if you catch them in the early stages, you can remove the top layer of the kraut if the kraut and the kraut below is fine to eat. But as the maggots develop, the brine becomes increasingly funky and eventually quite foul. Each time you scoop some sauerkraut out of the crock, you have to repack it carefully. Make sure the kraut is packed tight in the crock, the surface is level, and the cover and weight are clean. Sometimes water evaporates, so if the kraut is not submerged, just add water as necessary. Some people further preserve kraut by canning and heat processing it. This can be done, but so much of the power of the sauerkraut and its aliveness, I wonder, why kill it? Sauerrüben. A traditional German variant of sauerkraut is Sauerrüben, made from turnips. The turnip is a much maligned and underappreciated vegetable. In fact, our local grain grocers, and maybe yours, are sometimes left with softening unsold turnips. I'm always glad to take aging produce off their hands. It is a valuable scavenger mission to rescue food that is past its glorious prime, but still edible and nutritious, before it gets relegated to the compost. Fermenting is a great way to make use of a sudden bounty like this. I love the sharp, sweet flavor of turnips, and fermentation only intensifies their distinctive flavor. Sauerrüben can also be made from turnip's cousin, rutabaga. You can also sour cabbage and turnips together, of course. Mix and match is allowed. There's a recipe for Sauerrüben, and I encourage you to go to archive.org to look up these recipes. Next, low salt or salt-free sauerkrauts. Salt is not absolutely necessary for fermenting vegetables. Personally, I think ferments made with even just a tiny bit of salt taste much better and have a far superior texture than those with none. But if you wish to avoid all salt, you can still enjoy fermented vegetables. What salt does is to help establish a selective environment favorable to lactic acid bacteria by inhibiting other bacteria and molds and slow the enzymes that make vegetables go soft. Even a tiny bit of salt, as little as 0.5%, 1 teaspoon for 2 pounds of vegetables, can bring some of this benefit. Without salt to provide these functions, salt-free ferments are typically fermented for much shorter periods of time. 2 or 3 days is plenty. Taste daily and refrigerate when your ferment tastes ripe to you. Other mineral-rich ingredients can provide at least a portion of the beneficial functions of salt. Seaweed is an excellent source of minerals. Soak seaweed in a little water to rehydrate. Press it under water and squeeze. chop rehydrated seaweed and add to the ferment along with soaking water. Seeds such as caraway, celery, and dill are also mineral rich. Celery juices as well. The best salt-free kraut I have made incorporated celery juice. I juiced a few stalks of celery, diluted the thick juice with an equal quantity of water, and mixed this liquid with vegetables to ferment. In salt-free ferments, some people use the live cultures and acidity of whey or the acidity of a small proportion of lemon or lime juice as an alternative means of creating selective environments. Pulling water out of the vegetables, typically facilitated by salt, can be a challenge when fermenting without salt. Vegetables to be fermented without salt need more bruising by pounding or squeezing than do salted vegetables. It can also help to expose more surface area, so chopping vegetables more finely. With or without salt, the primary objective remains the same: to get vegetables submerged under liquid, and whey or water as necessary. Add whey or water as necessary, or cover vegetables with fruit or vegetable juice or wine for a wine kraut. Brining. The dry salting method used for sauerkraut works well when you shred or chop your vegetables, for only with lots of surface area exposed can the salt pull water out of the vegetables in order for them to ferment under their own juices. This results in the most concentrated vegetable flavor, but is impossible with whole vegetables or large chunks. In this case, you need to cover the vegetables with a saltwater solution known as brine. You want to mix the brine fairly strong, since it will be diluted by the vegetables that go into it. Although brining proportions may vary, 5% is a good starting point, meaning 5% by weight or 1.6 ounces or 50 grams per quart/liter. That translates to about 3 tablespoons of salt per quart or liter. A bit more with fine salt, a bit less with coarse. Stir well for several minutes until the salt is fully dissolved. While 5% salt would be extremely salty in sauerkraut, a 5% brine yields a much lower salt product because once the vegetables go into the brine, they absorb salt and release juices, thereby diluting the salt concentration by more than half. Estimate required brine quantity as about half the volume of your vessel. Add as little brine as possible to the vegetables, packing them tightly and pressing down under the brine. Salt in brine will pull water from the vegetables, and the amount of brine will increase. Salt will diffuse into vegetables gradually. Taste the brine after a day or two and adjust the salt by adding more if necessary, or adding water if the brine is too salty. A general rule of thumb to consider in salting your ferments: more salt to slow microorganism action in summer heat, less salt in winter when microbial action slows. Sour pickles. Growing up in New York City, experiencing my Jewish heritage largely through food, I developed a taste for sour pickles. These pickles were very different from most of what is sold in stores as pickles, and even what home canners pickle, which are preserved in vinegar. These two are pickles, which encompass anything preserved in an acidic medium, but my idea of a pickle is one fermented in a brine and preserved by lactic acid rather than acetic acid. Pickle making requires close attention. My first attempt at brine pickling resulted in soft, mushy pickles that were unappealing because I abandoned the project for a few days, and perhaps the brine was not salty enough, and because of the heat of the Tennessee summer, and our perfection lies in our imperfection. There are inevitably fermentation failures. We are dealing with fickle life forces after all. I persevered though, compelled by a craving deep inside me for the yummy garlic dill sour pickles of Gus's Pickle Stall on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and Zabar's on the Upper West Side. As it turns out, brine pickles are easy. You just need to keep fermentation short in summer heat when cucumbers are most abundant. In a cool place, they can slowly ferment for weeks or even months. But in a very hot place, they may sour after just a few days and can start getting soft and mushy in less than a week. One quality prized in a good pickle is crunchiness. It is enzymes activated by heat that break down the crunchiness. Salt slows them down, as do tannins found on fresh grape leaves, frequently placed in the jar to help keep pickles crunchy. I recommend using them if you have access to grapevines. I've also had good results using horseradish leaves, sour cherry leaves, oak leaves, and tea bags. One other variable in pickle making is cucumber size. I prefer pickles from small to medium cucumbers. Pickles from big ones can be tough and often hollow in the middle. And then there's the recipe. Mixed vegetable crock. The brining process described is not limited to cucumber pickles. Pretty much any vegetable you have in abundance except for ripe tomatoes, which get soft and lose their form, can be fermented in this way. One memorable crock I made as the first frost was predicted and we were scurrying to harvest the last of our summer garden included small yellow summer squash, whole red chili peppers, baby eggplants, green tomatoes, and beans. I also used lots of basil, which gave the pickles and the brine a really unusual sweet flavor. I especially enjoyed the pickled baby eggplants. They lost some of their dark color due to the brine and were left with a beautiful streaked appearance. Green tomatoes pickle well, especially the fleshy plum varieties. Brined garlic. I am a garlic fanatic. I believe that raw garlic is a potent medicine, and I eat it often. As you get to the bottom of your pickle crocks, the garlic and other seasonings that you used will be left either floating at the top or sunk at the bottom. I like to collect the garlic pieces from the crock in a jar, cover them with a little of the brine, and keep them, either in the fridge or continuing to ferment on the kitchen counter. The garlic is still pungent and flavored by all the other delicious vegetables and spices it's been fermenting with. I use this garlic for cooking or eat it raw. I also like to use the brine, which quickly takes on a strong garlicky flavor, for salad dressings or straight up in a small glass as a healthful digestive tonic. If this appeals to you, you could also skip the initial vegetable crock and simply brine garlic cloves. Brine as a digestive tonic and soup stock. Brine serves not only to provide a salty, watery environment for vegetables to ferment, but also as a medium to meld the flavors of the various spices and vegetables you include in your pickles. The brine itself becomes full of complex flavor as it bubbles. It is also full of lactic acid bacteria and an excellent digestive tonic. Chances are there is more brine left in your crock after you finish your pickles than you could consume raw. It is strong, salty stuff, and there's lots of it. Try using it as a soup stock. In Russian, brine is called rasol, and soup with rasol as its base is called rasolnik. Dilute brine with water to the level of saltiness you like. Then add vegetables, including pickles, and a little tomato paste. Serve hot with a dollop of sour cream. Pickle brine is also used in cold soups such as okroshka. See page 165. Milkweed pod, nasturtium bud, or radish capers. Capers are the flower buds of a Mediterranean shrub known as the caper bush, Caperis spinosa, which I have not personally encountered. But the delicious savory flavor of capers is largely due to the brining process and certain other flower buds and seed pods. My friend Lisa and I were eating capers and talking about how much we love them. In food as in fashion, the small accessories make all the difference. Lisa noticed that the pods were just developing on the abundant milkweed plants and had the idea to try brining them. So we mixed up a batch, and they were so good. Better than capers from caper bushes, I dare say. You can't buy milkweed pods in a store, but it's a weed that's widespread in the United States. The seed pods you want appear in high summer, just after the big flowers fall away. The smaller the pods are when you pick them, the better. They are most suitable for this the first few days after they emerge, and as they grow, they get tough and bitter. Nasturtium flower buds are another great caper alternative, using this same process. Their flavor, like the nasturtium's leaves and flowers, is peppery and slightly hot. Radish seed pods that develop on unharvested radishes offer another caper alternative. Taste for tenderness first because they can become woody. We have the recipe. Kimchi. Kimchi is the Korean name for fermented vegetables, generally spicy but not always, and made in nearly infinite variety. In certain respects, making kimchi is similar to making sauerkraut. The vegetables are submerged under brine in order to create the environment favorable to lactic acid bacteria present on the vegetables. But whereas in the sauerkraut dry salting method the juice is pulled out from the vegetables, in kimchi generally the napa cabbage, radishes, and other vegetables are soaked in a salty brine for several hours or days to leach bitterness and make them more flexible, and thus easier to compress and submerge. Drained vegetables are then mixed with spices, often along with rice paste, sugar, fish sauce, fish, or crustaceans. Kimchi is most often spicy, with generous use of garlic, hot chili peppers, ginger, and shallots, scallions, leeks, or onions. Especially when rice paste or sugar is added, kimchi ferments fast and is often fermented for a shorter time than sauerkraut. Most Koreans eat kimchi with every meal, frequently several contrasting styles to complement a single meal. Though factory-manufactured kimchi is gaining in popularity, much of it imported from China, home production continues to be very important. It remains customary for employers to give their employees an annual kimchi bonus in the autumn so they can purchase the ingredients to make their annual supply. The United Nations Educational, Science, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, has included the making and sharing of kimchi, kimjang, on its list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Beichu cabbage kimchi. This is a basic kimchi to illustrate the process. Definitely feel free to experiment with different vegetables and proportions. There's our recipe. Radish dreaming. One root vegetable, the simple radish, changed my life with a mystical plant communication. It happened while I was briefly hospitalized during February 2000. Earlier that winter, one balmy, sunny January day full of the promise of spring, I had decided to plant some radishes. Sowing seeds out of doors that early is largely a symbolic gesture, performed for the sheer life-affirming joy of seeing germination and growth in the winter, since any vegetables that might result are likely to be puny. Predictably enough, the weather turned cold and gray after this sunny day, and I didn't notice any seedlings emerge, so I gave up on the poor radishes and forgot about them. Meanwhile, I was feeling a bizarre internal sensation in my abdomen and landed in the hospital. Such a contrast to my life in the woods, outdoors most of the time. The hospital is a totally denatured environment. The windows are sealed shut. Everything is white and antiseptic. The food is all ultra-processed, and they fed me chemicals through my mouth, my veins, and even my anus. I was feeling scared and just wanted to go home. When one night in my dreams the radishes came to comfort me, and I woke up with a vivid image of the radishes I had planted germinating. It was very real. I felt like I'd received a plant communication. The day I was released from the hospital, I arrived home late in the afternoon and didn't make it out to the garden. I asked my garden co-conspirators whether they had noticed the radishes up, and they had not. Oh well, just a dream, I thought. The next morning I made it out to the garden, and lo and behold, the radishes had germinated. Delicate, pert, tiny seedlings defied the elements to reach toward the sun with their potent life force. As I recuperated, radishes became one of my plant totems, and they continued so to this day. So easy to grow, sharp, tangy, in so many different colors and shapes. Radishes came to offer me hope at a frightening time, and to remind me of how versatile plant allies can be. Radish and root kimchi. I have a strong affinity for roots. I am awed by their strength, growing deep into the earth. Some roots are gnarled, turning this way and that around rocks in their relentless search for water and nutrients in the soil. Others exhibit glamorous curves and showy colors. Their flavors are varied and in some cases extreme. Korea has a tradition of radish kimchi. Turnips are also found in Korean recipes. Beyond tradition, I add others. You can make kimchi by fermenting any vegetables you like with the classic kimchi quartet of garlic, hot pepper, ginger, and onion in any of its forms. In this kimchi, I added grated horseradish roots, which blend with a complement of the traditional heating spices. Some of the roots referenced in this recipe may be unfamiliar. Burdock is a common weed, nutritious and delicious, with the flavor I think of as earthy. It's used widely in Japanese cuisine, where it is known as gobo. Sorry if that pronunciation is incorrect. Burdock is also a powerful medicinal plant, stimulating lymphatic flows and tonifying the organs of elimination, the skin, kidneys, and liver. Burdock nourishes the most extreme, buried, and far-reaching aspects of ourselves, writes herbalist Susan S. Weed. Burdock breaks the ground for deep transformation. Ooh, we need some burdock. Many health food stores sell fresh burdock roots. I harvest it from around my house, where I disperse seeds just a couple of times to get multiple generations going. Burdock is biennial. If you harvest your own, make sure you dig first-year roots, which is to say plants with all the leaves all growing from the ground level. The second year, when it grows tall and develops the notorious burrs that cling to dogs and people, for which the plant is named, the roots become woody and tasteless. Jerusalem artichokes, also called sunchokes, Helianthus tuberosus, are nothing like artichokes. They are knobby tubers in the sunflower family, native to the eastern United States, with a fresh, crunchy taste reminiscent of watered chestnuts. Jerusalem artichokes are not widely available beyond farmers markets and organic shops. There are some of the easiest things you can grow, and once you plant them, they keep coming back every year. And there is a recipe. Fruit kimchi. A Tennessee neighbor of mine, Nancy Ramsay, spent many years living in Korea and told me about fruit kimchi. My method is improvisational, based on her description. The sweet fruit contrasts beautifully with the spicy and sour kimchi flavors and makes for a surprising and bold taste sensation. If you ferment it for too long, the sweetness of the fruit all turns into acidity, and you lose the dramatic contrast. Gone drunk. Nope. Gundruk. There we go. Gundruk is a strong and delicious pickle made from vegetable greens traditional in the Himalayan mountains. What distinguishes this ferment is that its sole ingredient is the vegetable itself, greens. No salt or any other ingredient is used. The greens can be turnip greens, mustard greens, kale, collards, or any hardy green in the brassica family. I originally learned about gundruk from books, and not until I was working on the revision in 2015 did I encounter it outside my own kitchen when I tasted delicious gundruk made by Bhutanese gardeners who are part of the Tennessee Refugee Agricultural Partnership Program and learned how they make it. There is the recipe. Japanese Nuka brand pickles. Nuka is I apologize, I'm going to pronounce all these wrong. Nuka is a traditional Japanese pickle in which vegetables are buried in a paste of rice bran and water, along with salt, kombu, seaweed, ginger, miso, and sometimes sake or beer, shiitake mushrooms, mustard, chili pepper, or other flavor embellishments. Each Nuka pot is unique, but in this rich medium, the pickles develop deep, complex flavors with hints of all these elements. In a mature Nuka pot, vegetables can be pickled in mere hours. Bran is the fibrous outer layer, milled off grains to produce the white versions. Rice bran is traditional in Japan, but wheat bran works similarly as a pickling medium. The bran pickling medium takes a week or longer to get going, but once you develop the Nuka bed, you could potentially keep adding and harvesting vegetables indefinitely. This recipe is based on 1 pound, 500 grams of bran, which will barely half fill a 1 gallon 4-liter vessel. It is important to leave lots of space in the vessel to make stirring easy, because frequent, at least daily stirring is essential to the development and ongoing health of flavor of the Nuka medium. And then there's the recipe. Beet kvass and other fermented vegetable infusions. Beet kvass is a Ukrainian fermented infusion of beets in water, lightly salted. It and related fermented vegetable infusions represent the far end of a spectrum of vegetable water ratios used in fermentation. At the other end is sauerkraut and the dry salting method, where no water is added. In between are brined vegetables, where water is added, but as little as possible so as to minimize dilution of the flavor of the vegetables. In the case of these infusions, we use much more water than vegetables, and the liquid, flavored by the vegetables and lactic acid from fermentation, is the final product, while the vegetables end up being nearly tasteless. Compost them, feed them to animals, or incorporate them into the food. I usually make beet kvass in a quart-liter jar. Chop a large beet or several small ones into a 1/2 inch 1 centimeter cubes, filling the jar just 1/4 to 1/3 of the way. Augment with horseradish root, yum, ginger, garlic, turnips, or as you wish. Cover with water to mostly fill the jar. Add a pinch of salt. Some people add very little whey or sauerkraut juice as a starter, but the raw vegetables have the necessary bacteria. Ferment for a few days. Exactly how many days depends on the temperature, specific ingredients and ratios, microbial ecology, and flavor preferences. Taste daily. When it starts to develop a deep, dark color and the pleasing strength, strain out the beets. You can enjoy beet kvass just like that as a beverage. Use it as a base for borscht or lightly carbonate it by transferring the liquid to a sealable vessel that can hold a little pressure, sealing, and then leaving a day or more at room temperature. Another fermented vegetable infusion is known as cultured cabbage juice. To make it, fill a blender with chopped cabbage, then cover the cabbage with water until the blender is about 2/3 full with water. Blend into a slurry and pour into a jar. Repeat a few times for a larger batch. Add a pinch of salt, cover, and ferment for a few days, tasting daily. When it tastes ripe, strain out the cabbage. The liquid is cultured cabbage juice. Kanji is a very delicious spicy Punjabi beverage made by fermenting carrots and mustard seeds in water with salt. Recipes call for burgundy-colored carrots. If you don't have those, try adding beet to your carrots. Slice vegetables into matchsticks. Use about 1/4 pound or 125 grams of vegetables and 3 tablespoons of mustard seeds, whole or ground, along with 1 tablespoon of salt for a quart or liter. Ferment in a covered vessel in a warm spot for about a week. Then strain and enjoy. Salgam suyu is yet another example from Turkey, the sour and salty brine from fermented purple carrots and turnips. How to integrate fermented vegetables into your meals. For many people, the big challenge with fermented vegetables is less how to make them than how to use them. My own feeling is that sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, and other fermented vegetables go with almost anything. They're a side accent that embellishes often plainer and more substantial foods. I generally think of them as condiments. Start with breakfast. Fermented vegetables with butter or peanut butter, or alone on toast. With eggs, in oatmeal, or congee, Chinese soupy rice. Or fermented millet porridge, with other savories rather than sweets. On a grilled cheese sandwich or quesadilla, or any kind of sandwich. On a burger, or pizza, or burrito, or salad. Whatever your everyday food consists of, fermented vegetables can adorn and improve it. I've emphasized eating fermented vegetables raw because I believe that their most profound nutritional benefit is the live bacterial cultures in them, which are destroyed by cooking. Yet, in the culinary traditions in which they evolved, Fermented vegetables are frequently used in cooking as well, with delicious results. Some of the classics I've enjoyed are Polish bigos, meat marinated and cooked in sauerkraut, sizzling hot kimchi jjigae stew, and sauerkraut pierogi. Dang, there's a lot of words I don't know how to pronounce. Eat most of your fermented vegetables raw, but don't be afraid to cook with them and experiment. Sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, and their juices can be easily incorporated into salad dressings, sauces, and spreads. Use finely minced fermented veggies and or juice. Both have strong flavor, and sometimes just a very small amount is perfect. I don't know how to speak French. Choucroute fromage roulette. These are a fun way to serve sauerkraut at a party, as finger food wrapped with cheese in soured whole cabbage leaves. I gave them this French name because I love French word for sauerkraut, choucroute, and because I first created them with my friend Jocelyn's annual Bastille Day party. Make sauerkraut with the following modification. Peel the leaves off the cabbage until the central section that remains can fit through the mouth of your vessel. Shred the leaves you removed and lightly salt. Use a knife to carefully remove the cylindrical core of the cabbage so that the juices will be able to penetrate to the center. Shred the core and mix with the salted leaves. Pack the vessel so that the head of the cabbage is embedded in the juicy, shredded cabbage, all submerged, and ferment as for the basic kraut recipe on page 51. After 1 or 2 weeks, remove the heads of cabbage, carefully peel off the individual cabbage leaves. In each leaf, place a small portion of sauerkraut and some crumbled feta, chèvre, or other cheese, then roll the leaf and insert a toothpick to hold. Well, isn't that fancy? And there's some further reading, and that is the end of chapter 5.